All right, everyone. We're on the eve of the much anticipated year 5 under Jim Harbaugh. We got Steve Deace on the line from Michigan Podcast to break down Michigan, the Big Ten, and the nation. We bring him in as much as we possibly can for the insight, the information, and the knowledge that he brings. So check him out on Michigan Podcast. Steve, how you doing today?
Man, I'm doing great. I'm sitting here in the man cave. I got the day off. And in my man cave, I've got 2 great rooms, Mark. And we moved into this house when the kids were little, about 12 years ago before we moved in. Home Depot at that time, you'll probably remember this, was selling the official color palette numbers for all the big college teams. Do you remember this?
I do.
Well, you should, because you're an ESPN guy, and that was their promotion that year. All right. And so I went and got the official palette numbers for maize and blue. And so I've got 2 great rooms in my basement. The other one over there is blue. I've done a lot of stuff with you from there. This is the first time I've been over here in the maize room, I'm even sitting on a blue couch. So I'm pumped. I'm ready to go. How are you?
We see the maize and blue. Yes, we do. And I can almost match the couch there, the cushions.
Yes. You can't see it. If I tilt my camera a little bit, you might be able to see. There's a picture of Michigan Stadium above me. Yeah.
I see it. It's in all its grandeur. So, yes, here we go. The 2019 version of Michigan football. The 2018 version was extremely good for 11 games. And we talked about ad nauseum what happened the final 2 and how that marked the season. As we open a season and not focus on a closing of a season, but the opening of a season, is there anything in you that even when the opponent is Middle Tennessee and the point spread is 34, that has cringing flashbacks to 2007?
No. I think we're just a much more developed program now, much deeper than we were back then. And to me, I realized this morning, Mark. 3 years in a row, Michigan has come into the year on a losing streak. And I don't mean you lost your last game. That's not a losing streak. I mean, you lost more than 2 or more games at the end of the previous season. We did this in 2017. We came in on a 2-game losing streak after losing to Ohio State in the Orange Bowl. In 2018, last year, we came in on a 3-game losing streak after losing to Wisconsin, Ohio State, and the Outback Bowl. And this year, again, we come in on a 2-game losing streak. So I think this is I think we're the toughest team in the country to analyze and to cover. And I know that we are increasingly becoming a hot takey industry. And there's a lot of SEC media, and I'm not even just talking about Paul Feinbaum, but there's like a cottage industry, the Barrett Sallees, the Clay Travises. And I actually like a lot of the content those guys produce, but they understand who their core audience is, and they've got big audiences, but they understand their audience is not in the Midwest where you and I live. They understand their audience is in the Southeast. And so we've got this interesting regionalization in media, similar to what we see in political media, where depending on who you're talking to, there's going to be an inherent bias towards a particular region or a conference or against another region or conference going in. And so I think we have to filter through all of that. But when I hear people like David Pollack at ESPN say on game day last week that he thinks Michigan, and he's an SEC guy too, but Michigan's his pick to not finish in the top 25. Every year since I think 25 of the last 26 years, there's been a team in the preseason AP top 10 that didn't finish in the top 25. Last year there was 3: Wisconsin, Miami, and Auburn. All 3 didn't finish in the final top 25. But I understand, I don't view David Pollack as a hot take guy. I get why even guys who are more measured in their comments like Pollack, Michigan provokes a certain reaction. And it's because on one hand, Jim Harbaugh has a top 10 win percentage and a top 10 amount of wins in all of college football since he took over. And he took over a program that barely averaged 7 wins a season the decade before he arrived. On the other hand, though, he has nothing significant to show for that. So you and I kind of love getting together in the offseason and talking history of college football. I don't know that we've ever seen anything like this, because in previous eras, there would have been shared championships. We would have passed out rings. if we didn't have a conference championship game in 2016, I think we would have had with Penn State. No, because Michigan's both losses were in conference. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, but we would have had shared titles even last year. So when you don't have shared titles and it's just there's only if you're not second place, you're last, Ricky Bobby, then having winning 75% of your games doesn't mean what it meant 10 or 15 years ago. And so Michigan's a fascinating team to try to get a handle on. On one hand, the record's top 10 in college football. On the other hand, they have like nothing to show for it whatsoever. So I understand why we provoke even measured people like David Pollock. I can understand why we provoke a certain response. Now, this year is going to be a clarifier because, now we're going to find out what was a reason and what was an excuse. Was Urban Meyer a reason or an excuse? Was the offensive scheme a reason or an excuse? The fact that we had to play these teams on the road, was it a reason or an excuse? This is the year we're going to find out because all those objections have now been answered. Most of these games are at home this year. We have we've got the hotshot offensive coordinator changing over the scheme, and Urban Meyer is gone. So this kind of is, in a way, a put up or shut up year for Jim Harbaugh.
It is certainly, but I don't think it's a final hot seat year.
Oh, I agree with that too.
That's the end of it, unless he goes 6-6 or 4-8
Agreed.
or something like that.
Yeah, I agree.
So I had this conversation with a reasonable caller last night who was just, I'm sick of hearing about the Michigan hype. I'm sick of hearing about it. What has Harbaugh ever accomplished? So I take the other side. I try to balance out the argument and try to bring all the positive things that he's done. But I've said certainly if his stay at Michigan doesn't include championships, it's a failure. That's why he was brought there. That's why he paid $7 million.
Can I ask you a follow-up question since you bring that up?
Sure.
What's the preseason hype? I'm curious. Is it the fact their win total is a modest 9 as we enter opening day in Vegas, which that's Michigan's win total pretty much every season is 9? Is it the fact that Desmond Howard on College Game Day last week, one of our most popular alums, picked Wisconsin to win the conference? I mean, I keep hearing about this preseason hype. Which hype is this? Can you help me understand? I guess there was a writers' poll in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and Michigan barely beat out Ohio State. That's the first time in 12 years that Michigan was, or Ohio, or 8 years, or whatever it is, that Ohio State wasn't picked to win that. What is the hype? I get that take in 2016. Jim's out there at all the camps and he's got his shirt off and he's showing up at Dodger games with his glove behind home plate and coaching first base for the Oakland A's. But in 2019, tell me he barely tweets. We just talked. Jerry DiNardo just said that of all the camp tours they went to, Michigan was the only team that didn't show him in actual practice. So I'm trying. I keep hearing this take, all the hype. What hype? Because all we hear is he gets dunked on all the time. He's terrible. 2 weeks ago, it was he's denying transfers at Cincinnati. Meanwhile, 3 Michigan players just got immediate eligibility. One of them who was just on the roster in May. All right. Because from our perspective, all we hear is our coach gets blamed for everything other than the Lindbergh kidnapping. We don't know where all this Michigan fans were like, what hype are we talking about? Because we don't see it.
Okay, this is what I'm going to say, Steve, is that we're a minority, you and I, not as fans in fan bases, as measured analysts who do our best to take logic, track record, projection based on all those things that provide context and framework, and then make a measured decision on our opinion or our prediction, whatever the case might be, whereas everybody just a ton of people run off at the mouth, and I'm constantly checking people using the same terms. They're overrated. Okay, well, give me some context. Where are you getting this rating from? So-and-so's overrated. So-and-so's underrated. They're hyped too much. I heard the other night from a caller, somebody said, Jake Fromm's never won any big games. I said, well, first of all, before I tear that apart, give me your definition of a big game. What is a big game? Well, he's not won any national championships. Correct. Could you come on the show and say Jake Fromm's never won a national championship? Because winning a college football playoff game and an SEC championship game, I would consider those pretty big games. So, yeah, I just think we live in this world where people just take off and run off at the mouth, and they really don't know what they're saying or the definition of the words that they're throwing out there. And they create their own hype or overrated this or whatever it is.
Point taken. You're right. And
that's what I think it is.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. That's why I asked you. Like, I wouldn't ask Twitter Egg 69 on, what's your definition of overhyped with his 14 followers. But I'm asking you because I know you take this seriously, because I want to make sure I'm checking myself on my end too. I try to look at this rationally, analytically. I have to do that on a professional level in my day job. I can't always give the analysis based on the world as I would like it to be. I have to give analysis based on the world as it is. But this year, I guess I really don't see the hype. I don't. When ESPN's FPI picked Michigan 5th in the offseason, they got utterly destroyed. Other than that, Michigan's kind of, most people have them, Athlon's picks Michigan to win the Big Ten. Phil Steele did. But if you look at, a lot of the coaches poll, the AP poll, they're 7th, 8th, 9th, that's pretty much what they've been under Jim Harbaugh, as a team in the bottom half of the top 10. I guess I don't see an added layer of hype. I don't see it. But, I heard Kirk Herbstreit, and I love Kirk Herbstreit. Okay. Love the guy. But I heard him on a radio interview on Sirius XM the other day, and he was asked by Danny Cannell why he's picking Ohio State over Michigan for the Big Ten title. And I guess I would have assumed probably because Ohio State, if you look at the 4 and 5 stars more that they've recruited over Michigan, they almost have an entire recruiting class of more of those guys. Almost. It's not quite that many. It's like 16. But that's almost an entire class more. Or Jim Harbaugh is 1-9 against top 10 teams. That's kind of true. When they beat Colorado and Penn State in 2016, they weren't ranked in the top 10 at the time, but they finished that way at the end of the year. But even if you give them those games, then he's 3-9. That's still not very good. All right. So I thought those were going to be the reasons he listed. And he said, well, I just kind of think Ohio State has a chip on its shoulder. I sensed that he said he sensed that at Big Ten Media Days. I'm like, so like 6 writers out of 50 at the Cleveland Plain Dealer poll picked Michigan over you. Who's got a bigger chip on their shoulder other than we were in the playoff last year and we gave up 100 points on national television in our last 2 games? Who's got a bigger chip on his shoulder than I'm the only coach that's actually advocating for players to get a one-time transfer anywhere you want exemption, and my integrity is getting dragged through the mud because I won't lie on an NCAA form? I mean, I'm not sure if we're going to judge picks by chip on the shoulder. I mean, you tell me who's got a bigger chip on their shoulder in our conference right now than Michigan is, because we're everybody's dunking boy. Hell, half of our own fans are dunking on us after the way last season ended, and I was one of them. So that's why I wanted to check with you to see, what is this Harbaugh hype train? Because I'm kind of actually seeing it the other way, but I could be wrong. That could be my own fan bias.
Well, I certainly try to remind people as I look through history at these type of situations, and this is a very unique one, but still there are other examples of rivals that both play at an elite level where there's been some level of domination, maybe not for 15 years, but maybe for 5 or 6. And then there's been some kind of transition that has marked the breakthrough for the other program. And that these programs are obviously, the rosters are very close in talent, although there is I use the word decided. I have all sorts of people commenting to me that Ohio State's so much more talented, and then I have other people saying it's dead even. I think there's a decided advantage on the roster for Ohio State, but it's reasonable. There are tons of teams out there that beat better teams in the recruiting rankings every week in college football. So it would not be any shock to me. I was actually leaning Michigan the entire offseason for all the obvious points that we've discussed in the past. And then when I had to pull the trigger, I pulled it for Ohio State, thinking that Justin Fields would have 11 games under his belt, a defense that was deplorable, 71st in the country last year, would play up to its talent level eventually with Greg Schiano out of the way, and that Ryan Day he's a brilliant guy. I don't think he's going to have the issues that Manny Diaz had the other night, but that he's going to be better prepared for that type situation in that type game by game 12, not a September matchup against Michigan. I would feel somewhat differently. But, I provide the framework for people that say, this is crazy. People are picking Michigan. Oh, this is coming from the Ohio State community generally, of course, that it's crazy because we beat them 15 years in a row, except for the one Luke Fickell year, of course. And how can you make a case for Michigan? Well, it's easy to make a case for Michigan, but it's also easy to make the case for Ohio State.
Sure.
That's just, we always win, so we're always going to win. But I remind Ohio State fans, this is going to end. This is not a Rutgers series, that you're going to win 20 or 25 years in a row. It's just not going to happen. I don't know when it's going to end. I don't know when it's going to end, if it's going to be significant to a championship. Most likely it is, but it's going to happen. And as I reminded the caller last night, this is not an excuse, but again, we have to take results and put them into context and give them some meaning. And in evaluating Harbaugh, again, the 2016 game literally could have, when you talk about games that it could have gone either way, we bring that up every week. That game could have gone this way, and it's true to a certain, but when you talk about the measurement of a credit card between the sticks and the football, that's as close as it gets. And Michigan is a heavy favorite in Indianapolis to get to a college football playoff.
I think that's very well said. And I'm really fascinated by Ohio State. A couple of years ago when you and I first started talking, I told you I thought with all the young talent Michigan had coming in after all the seniors that lost in 2016, and we had 19 guys in NFL training camps that summer, that I thought we were the most interesting team to forecast, because Harbaugh was going to try to do on the fly. You might remember me saying this. Harbaugh was going to try to do on the fly what the Dabo Sweeneys and Urban Meyers and Nick Saban's been able to do. I mean, in 2016, when Ohio State made the playoff, they went into the year, I think, the lowest ranked Power 5 team on Phil Steele's overall experience chart. So they were going to try, Michigan was going to try to do that kind of rebuild on the fly, but without having 4 full recruiting classes built in the way those other 3 schools. And you saw what happened when they got off to a quick start, but as the season wore on and it was more about depth and experience, they faded at the end. This year, I think Ohio State's the most fascinating team in college football. And the reason why is you and I, we've had this conversation already, but if you just to reiterate, if you take all of Urban Meyer's career, and what do you have, a 9.02 win percentage or something like that at Ohio State, the 8 years he was there?
Yep.
If you just reverse the outcome of one game, every one of those seasons, if it's the Michigan State game in 2014, they don't even make the Big Ten championship game, let alone win the national championship. Just to show you what the margin for error in our league is now, if you just reverse the outcome of one key game every one of Urban Meyer's seasons, and that reduces him, I say in all quotes, to Jim Tressel's win percentage of about 850, which is the best win percentage of a Big Ten coach with more than 5 years of experience since Bo Schembechler retired. If you just do that, you erase every Big Ten championship Urban Meyer won. I mean, you could concoct a not crazy scenario where he's tied with the best win percentage in this league in 30 years and has no rings to show for it at all. That's the margin for error in our league. And I think that's an incredibly difficult plateau for Ryan Day to meet. And now you go in this with Justin Fields, and I think Nebraska and Ohio State are very similar. It's just Ohio State's overall the more talented team. If you can keep that quarterback upright, now we've seen a lot more from Adrian Martinez than we have Justin Fields. You have somebody calling and ripping you about Jake Fromm. All we really know about Justin Fields is he couldn't beat out Jake Fromm. That's really all that we know. Okay. So let's say, though, as the season goes on, he gets better and better and better. It's similar to Nebraska. If you can keep that, you need the quarterback to run the ball. And if you can keep him upright for 12 weeks, you're going to be right there every single Saturday. But if Justin Fields goes down, I was listening to an interview Dave Revson gave a couple of days ago from the Big Ten Network, and he essentially said, if Justin Fields goes down, sound the alarm. That's the difference between 11-1 and you're back in the playoff hunt, and you may be 9-3, 8-4. And so I think all of our fan bases in our conference, particularly the ones now that are at the highest level where Ohio State is and where Michigan's about it, is probably one more step away from, and trying to get there. And Penn State's in that group as well. And yet several programs now in the Big Ten West that are kind of coming to kind of join the Michigan Penn State group, if you will. I think everybody needs to recognize now, with all of the money that's been invested here, all of the resources, for even programs like Purdue 2 years ago when Wilton Spate got hurt, they didn't have a damn MRI machine or X-ray machine on campus. They had to bus him to the hospital in West Lafayette off the stadium like it was 1981. Northwestern built a Taj Mahal right there on Lake Michigan. This stuff was inconceivable 10 or 15 years ago. And so, a few years ago, or his first year in the league, Urban Meyer really challenged this conference to get serious about winning on a national level, and it has. And so that's good news for the league. Here's the bad news, is the margin for error for everybody now is so much slimmer than it was before. And, if Ryan Day has a 78% win percentage, an 80% win percentage, which puts him at about a Woody Hayes level now, it's conceivable he could never win a Big Ten championship over 5 years, despite a historically great win percentage. That's how thin the air is now in the Big Ten. I think everybody needs to kind of recognize that.
The other viewpoint I'll add to that, though, Steve, is that the distribution of the wins is going to be important, of course.
Sure.
Because if, what Urban Meyer did, and people don't quite understand it because they look at the disappointing aspect of the losses that cost them playoff bids or national championships, is that, just the consistency over and over, losing one game. So the regular season records for Urban Meyer, 12-0, 12-0, 11-1, 11-1, 11-1, 10-2, 11-1. So it's just the consistency of that. So Ryan Day is going to, I think, forge a successful career at Ohio State by the standards of most, if there are enough of those 11-1s that enter them into the playoffs or Big Ten championships.
Mm-hmm.
If the 9-3s are sprinkled in every 3 or 4 years, and you finish in the top 10 or 15, and you have a reasonable year, and nobody gets too upset because you've got in the bank.
I think this is a key point you're making. Yeah, what you're saying is Urban Meyer, it never had the cycle down year. Now, a cycle down year at Ohio State's going to be 8-4, 9-3. All right. Urban Meyer never had the cycle down year that a Jim Tressel had or every other Ohio State coach had. Okay. Even Woody Hayes, in an era where he had 115 scholarships, and it was the big 2, little 8, had cycle down years. Urban Meyer never had that. Michigan had one in 2017. This might be one for Penn State, without Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley. And I don't know if you know this or not, Mark, but in the 2 years James Franklin had Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley together, James Franklin won 81% of his games. In the 3 seasons he didn't have those two guys together, he won 59% of his games. So that's an incredible number. That's an incredible gap. Not to mention, how do you lose 7 games when you have Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley together? Do you think Urban Meyer would have lost 7 games in 2 years with Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley? Do you think Jim Harbaugh would have lost 7 games? Well, Urban Meyer wasn't losing 7 games in 2 years, period. Do you think Jim Harbaugh would have lost 7 games in 2 years with Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley? I sure as hell don't.
No.
And that's the high watermark for Franklin. So this, with how young they are, particularly on offense, this could be a bit of a cycle down, 8-4 kind of a season for them. But that under Urban Meyer, Ohio State has not gone through the cycle down year. And so what I hear you saying is, hey, Ryan Day may win 2 or 3 Big Ten titles over 6 or 7 years like Urban Meyer did, but instead of his down year being 10-2 and we almost still made the playoffs, his down year might be an 8-4. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. And so what Michigan fans are looking at it now for the inverse is, we had the 1 cycle down year, and then we had the 3 years that we were really right there. And now the question is, are we ever going to get over that hump? Or are we always just going to kind of be right there? That's the question that Michigan fans have right now.